recording? We are live.
We are live, and I have crap. It's terrible.
I'm so
And
glad
we're
you had
going to talk about it.
So glad you had the complete Psionics handbook as crap. No one's disagreeing, by the way. We all agree.
Nobody's going to disagree with the complete Psionics handbook as crap because it is. Oh, but wait, we're going
to get a hate mail from the Psionicist people.
I hope so. That would make my evening. But if that's the case, I'm going to take a moment to share.
We should also introduce ourselves at some point. I don't know, man.
Yeah,
Let's
absolutely.
be professionals about this or something.
Absolutely, but I think we only have one person watching right now.
Awesome, doesn't matter.
Exactly. It doesn't exactly matter. I'm just trying to share the thing.
So while you're sharing it, welcome everybody. My name is Michael O.J.
I am Dr. J.R. Whitcomb.
And together, we're Michael and J.R.
And this is a totally different podcast.
Which is a name that we were shocked wasn't taken when we found out.
Right?
We were like, oh, what if we call ourselves a totally different podcast?
That's got to be a thing.
Was not a thing. Now it's a thing. So
it's a thing now. It's our thing.
So what this kind of is I am a magician by trade. I'm a magician and historian by trade. You are a sideshow person.
Sideshow person. Carney. I am a proprietor of a comedy danger show where we are purveyors of body manipulation and stunts. Yeah. I totally have a doctorate.
You don't have a doctorate. We had this fight all the time. No, okay, so, and I'm not gonna give a spiel. I do magic tricks and I do like card tricks and people like clap and stuff.
People clap.
But I am also a game designer, and you have done a lot of work with gaming in general.
Oh God, what I think if I think about it, it's been about 24 years for me since I first picked up a set of dice and rolled them.
And I'm 20 and I'm 25. I think I started playing when I was 13. Yeah, I was 13.
So 2007. No, that's not the right math.
No, it would be 2008, I want to say.
Yeah, there we go.
2008, yeah.
I subtracted 13 from the year, and I'm like, wait, no, he's 25. Anyway, I was close enough.
So, every episode of the show, we're kind of been going over different facets of things that we're interested in. We can do, we're going to be talking about, like, magic history at some point. We're going to be talking about sideshow history at some point. Video games, pop culture.
Creepy steampunk things.
Creepy steampunk things.
For you creepy steampunk people out there.
There's so many of them. They're like it's like an infection. But tonight, each episode is going to be about an hour. We're going to try to hold ourselves to that number. In fact, we're going to hold ourselves to that number. We're going to be going over the history of Dungeons and Dragons, which is something that we've been both doing for a while, and we've both gone down a pretty deep rabbit hole here in my 17 pages of notes on the topic.
I only have 2 pages, and one fell out of the notebook already.
And we're going to be talking about kind of like the history of how D&D got to where it is today. We're going to be starting with the introductions into what was called Chainmail. We're probably not going to get through everything tonight. We're probably going to go over multiple editions over the course of a few nights. We're going to be hopefully getting to AD&D tonight. But if we don't, that's also fine. But yeah, let's just start at the obvious. What is Dungeons and Dragons? I guess I found everyone has a different definition for this. And go ahead, Jeff.
I mean, in its base form, it is a role-playing game, which is a combination of simple dice rules and guerrilla theater, if you really want to, cut down to the chase of it. Dungeons and Dragons specifically in its base form is fantasy format. It has a lot of roots in Tolkien, whether the Tolkien estate likes it or not, and whether Gary Gygax likes it or not. More on that in a little bit.
Talking about the multiple lawsuits that happened over D&D, because there was a whole bunch of them, right?
But yeah, that's the long and the short of it from my end. You?
I guess it's just it's the first really tabletop role-playing game we really get. It's not the first. There were others before it, which we'll be briefly touching on, but it's the first one to actually hit mainstream pop culture, and part of its rise to popularity is partially from our Satanic Panic.
Yep.
Of the amount of publicity it got. And I guess they say when all publicity is good publicity, they weren't lying. But I guess starting off, we have to talk about the actual origins of the game. Talking about the creator, who most people know. I think we mentioned the name Gygax, Gary Gygax, in a group of nerds. They kind of go, "Oh yeah, I at least know who that is."
Equally important, slightly less known, is Dave Arneson.
Dave Arneson,
Jeff Perrin, yeah.
Few other people. There is Lorraine Williams, who's going to show up later, who was something.
She was something.
But partially, she's going to show up later, and she's going to change around the marketing of D&D, and D&D is going to become hyper marketed because of her. But everyone thinks of Dungeons and Dragons too as Wizards of the Coast. It was not always Wizards of the Coast. It was TSR when it first started.
Oh my God. And it's one of those things, TSR, I always remember what TSR stands for, except for when I need to.
Tactical Studios Rules. Tactical Studies Rules. That's what it is. Because the word tactical really comes from the roots of where this all started, and that was wargaming. Now, wargaming is still around. Wargaming is still around from the point of view of mostly it's Warhammer now. Warhammer is like the solid game. And initially, it stemmed from a bunch of people who would get together and reenact historical battles. It was really weird if you were doing a war game that wasn't historical prior to like the 70s. A lot of it was like Revolutionary War stuff. Most of it was actually like Napoleonic. There was a lot of like Napoleonic War stuff. There was a lot of like, how do I get my country's armies? Because it was a real World War situation. World War II games were around, but they weren't as common. That's more like Axis and Allies, another board game that comes out later. Craze that come out, the World War II craze wasn't necessarily there, but medieval fantasy like knights was also the height. People loved having little tabletop miniatures of fighters, but initially it was the guns. People liked the gun, the rules of guns and getting their little armies put together. And there's still a following today.
Yeah,
of historical battles. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, I mean, like one of those things, it's like, it used to be one of those things you'd be able to buy the armies in like sets. You'd go into the gaming store and be like, this is the Battle of Agincourt set, you know, and you'd be able to pick it up. Like, these were the units that were used historically, and you would have to assemble them. You'd have to paint them and stuff like that. And for many of the wargamings, depending on which system you were using, there would be different stats assigned and et cetera, et cetera. And it would always be the race of, can you beat history? Can you come up with the tactics that would have won the Battle of Waterloo or something ridiculous like that?
Yeah. It was a niche community within like a hyper intellectual community. They were so interested in having historically accurate miniatures and historically accurate formations, and they loved that stuff. The original like artwork for it was a bunch of guys in like suits and ties playing a game, and there would be a referee played. Like today, if you played war games, say Warhammer's, again, the big one, there's no referee. But there used to be a guy who would sit there with like the tape measure, and he would decide where everything was, and he'd be the impartial judge of your battles. And these games would take a couple hours, so you would have like a begrudging guy to be like, yeah, I'll be the referee. All right, I'll sit here and I'll handle the game pieces. You die. And because this happens, we get the first real outcome of what a dungeon master could possibly be. But Chainmail. Initially, Gygax ended up meeting a man named Dave Arneson, who we mentioned before, at a gaming club, and eventually they would go to a convention, which is still around today, called Gen Con, which is kind of a celebration of all things board games, all things war game. I think it's the largest gaming convention in the country. I think PAX Unplugged is second, but I think Gen Con is still very clearly number one.
Yep. For reference, Gen Con 1 was in 1968.
And D&D we get around in 74?
Yeah.
Yeah, 74,
funny, yeah. Because I've never actually, like, I know I've looked at the dates before, but it never really clicked. Like, I had always thought that D&D came into its height around the time Chainmail was really big. So I'm, like, really realizing, like, it's a little bit more modern than I actually originally thought it was, which is kind of neat.
Well, so, yeah, and let's talk about, we talked about a little bit about tactical war games themselves, but Chainmail changed things around just a little bit. When Gary Gygax ended up releasing Chainmail, he created he was writing for an article for Guide on Games, and he wanted to release a rule supplement. He released Chainmail, which focused on heroes. So instead of it being a stereotypical army, he would have these units. There was two types. There was heroes, and then there was superheroes who would be kind of the centerpieces of your army. You might have a Gygax would go on to explain, like, it was kind of like to be Conan. Like, you would have an army of Celts running at you, but Conan the Barbarian would be leading the army. This like special hero unit was not really a thing back then because we're focusing on the historical relevance. Even like there were general units back then, like Napoleon you could field, but he gave you a small benefit to the army itself rather than any like Napoleon in a 1v1 fight with a soldier. It would be like a crapshoot. They were both pretty much equal. One guy just happened to have a horse. But here we get this heroes and superhero supplement to the actual game. And when he releases it, people tend to love it. People love the idea of controlling an individual character and building them up and having that individual character hit the battlefield.
Now, I forget, with the heroing system, leveling wasn't yet a thing yet. I mean, like you mentioned building them up. They weren't really building them up just yet, right?
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. There was ways to build up your guy. There was like a small system. So there was the hero level and superhero level. So there was a way to get them to the next stage. But the leveling aspect that we know of doesn't really come around. However, Chainmail changes immensely to be about the fantasy element. He releases a 15-page supplement called the Chainmail Fantasy Supplement. This is just like a small pamphlet you would like buy. There was just one of them to start with, and it added things like giants and dragons and trolls and the warrior class, and they had wizards who could lead your army. And the wizard could cast spells, and this was super revolutionary.
It wasn't the warrior class yet, Michael.
That's true. It was called the fighting man. The fighting man. That's right. There was the fighting man. There was the magic user, and I believe there was the cleric initially. Yeah.
And the cleric was not like what you think the cleric is nowadays. The cleric was garbage.
So we can talk about why they were garbage. So essentially, the wizards, the fact that you had a wizard on your team. The game also changed around. I should mention this. The game changed a little bit from the point of view of my army versus your army, and it slowly became the referee's army of like dragons and trolls to against my friends and our hero characters. So the original Chainmail, you weren't playing like a 1v1 match with like heroes in the field with this fantasy supplement.
It was like 1v40, right? It was the ref versus like about 40 other players.
Oh yeah, no, I would have my fighting man. You would have your wizard. I would have my cleric, and we'd all hang out together and we would fight this fantasy battle.
Now, as exciting and as cool as that all sounds, I really would like our listeners to take a moment and really puzzle on this. Think about, like, you've probably played D&D or some other role-playing game before.
And if you haven't, you should definitely check it out. We highly recommend it. It's a
great Absolutely. Game. But the point that I'm making is have you ever been in combat initiative with, like, I don't know, 8 other people? You know how long that takes? Imagine 40 people on a giant table with rulers. I'm sorry. I as much as I love all of this and as much as I feel that we owe as a gaming community to all of this, man, that sounds boring.
Oh, absolutely. It we think about it as like this amazing thing, but man, was it probably not great. It was also deadly as hell. Your little guy would get tromped on and you'd be like, all right, cool, I'm out. And that's what would happen. If you had if you were playing at consistent tables and you had like a leveled up warrior, because they would level up these warriors. At this point, we're actually gaining points and leveling up our characters. They had different names. So there was like I have it written down here, but there's like you start off as a veteran. Because of course you do. If you're a fighting man, the opening is vet. Sure. Then you became like a warrior. Then you became like a fighter. Then you became like a myrmidon. And it kept ranking up. At level 19, you became a superhero. Then at 20, you became a lord.
I don't know.
In my opinion,
I don't know what it is with like early fantasy games like that, and like the whole like every level has to have a particular title to it. And I mean, Like I even remember like a lot of like my old NES games and stuff growing up, like Foxanadu and stuff. Every level your character would get like, yeah, you are now the Myrmidon, you are now the Battler. You know, like
They
I
didn't do
just
anything. Like, they weren't in
no.
special classes. They were just like, you get an additional die of damage, but we're
You get
gonna
a
call you
fancy
something
title.
brand new.
And I mean, why would anyone need a stupid title to attach to their name for no reason whatsoever? As I flash my fake degree at the camera.
I paid a lot of money for my degrees.
I paid $20 for mine.
I know you did. But the game would see some elements that we know today as staples in D&D. We would see things like wizards and their spellcasting system, which is called Vancian spellcasting. Now, this guy named Jack Vance, he made a series of novels called the Dying Earth series, which was essentially like it was post-apocalyptic, kind of like Time Machine-esque. Like they were on, the world died and magic came back to the world. And there were wizards who showed up, but everyone's like, there was post-apocalyptic like buildings and stuff, but you would still be like dudes in chainmail and like wizard robes and staffs fighting each other. But what made that system great, and what we know of it today, was the way they did spellcasting, which was a wizard could memorize a certain number of spells per day of a particular level, and then when they went to bed the next day, they forgot all these spells, and they had to rememorize them from their spell book.
Oh, so they're the reason that to this very day wizards have narcoleptic amnesia. I got it. Okay.
Actually,
it's their
no, 100%.
fault.
100%. Gygax was a huge fan of the Jack Vance series, and he loved the idea of the spellcasting. So he ends up taking it to this level of saying, hey, this is how all spells should work, and they should be able to forget their spells after the next day, and they have to memorize a certain number of books from their spells. And it was always about like how smart you were to get your character. Later, after we get this, we receive a different. Clerics. By the way, I want to talk about clerics real quick.
Do we have to?
Yes, we do, because the three classes you could play as was, again, the fighting man, the magic user, and the cleric. The cleric, he had two big differences. One, he could wear armor and cast spells. He was not as good of a fighter as the warrior, the fighting man, and he was not he couldn't cast as good spells as the magic user, but he could do a little bit of both. The fighter's benefit, the fighting man's benefit, was he could wield any weapon that he wanted in the game. Like if you found a magic weapon, only a fighting man could wield magic items. It was just a rule in the game, unless they were like cleric specific. And the cleric specific weapon was maces, which is why even today in D&D we see maces as the most common thing. That are all clerics see the picture, they have the mace, and they're all about smiting undead. They
Melinda, get me my smite stick.
They had a couple other powers too. They had power to turn undead. They had power to cure diseases, and they could learn a heal spell at 6th level. So most clerics aren't walking around with healing spells. They're walking around going, I can kind of help you with spells. Kind of. Now, a high-level wizard, on the other hand, could like be dropping like fireballs in the ceiling, like kill dragons in one hit. And they started off, like, you could just go up to them and be like, hey, I got him. And the wizard's dead. Because when you hit 0 hit points back in the day, you were dead. There's no saving throws aren't even a thing yet.
Nope.
You just died. What's also interesting is the inspiration behind Chainmail. Initially, Gygax wanted to make a game similar to Conan the Barbarian, and that kind of more gritty elements rather than the fantasy elements of Tolkien. But all of his friends said, we want Tolkien. I want Tolkien. So they got Tolkien. But he took some elements from different lores. For instance, trolls. Come to us from the Scandinavian lore where they could like regenerate and be hurt by fire. That wasn't really a Tolkien thing. Orcs, I found this out recently. Do you know orcs aren't from any folklore?
No, they're not.
It's just Tolkien invented them, which is crazy to me, right? This thing that is like such a staple in society. Tolkien was like, these are things. They're like big goblins. Then they became green for some reason. That was like a thing that comes way later. Initially, they're the Tolkien orcs. They're like the brown skin and the angry, savage mentality who were tortured elves. Some deep Tolkien lore. They're the tortured elves who have changed their images because they are loyal to Sauron after the years of torture he's inflicted. Yeah, I know stuff.
Yeah, you do. I'm sorry. I'm so currently burned out on Tolkien lore right now.
I like Tolkien lore. Now, there was another change. There was another change in a game called Barons of Braunstein, where one of Gygax's group member, one of the people he just played war games with, ended up finding Chainmail and went, what if this was about an individual character rather than the large army?
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you're thinking. Have you heard of this? I'm curious to see if you know the answer already.
What? I thought this was Blackmore. Wasn't this Blackmore?
No. This is Barons of Brownstein. Do you know what the individual character he was focusing on was?
No.
It's not what you think. It's not heroes. You could be like the baker, the town trapper, the town sheriff, and you would walk around.
I did remember reading about this. Yeah. It was before Blackmore, but yeah, I remember the thing. It's like, oh yeah, you could play as what we would consider now like the most NPC of NPCs.
You were like the town trapper, and that was like your spiel, and you leveled up. There was like a baker specific class that let you level up, and it's like, why? But apparently people played this shit. But afterwards, we get into Blackmore, which I'll let you talk about.
Oh, I mean, all Blackmore really was is Blackmore was the first attempt at a campaign at a campaign setting. It was the precursor to Greyhawk, which was Gary Gygax's initial Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting. And basically all Blackmore is a couple of folks got together and said, hey, what if we took these miniature wargaming rules and we just focused on not even 40 people, but a small group, an adventuring party, if you will, kind of like, the 9 walkers from the Fellowship of the Ring. What if we had them delving through dungeons, dealing with traps and stuff like that?
What if instead of being a schmuck during the Battle of Helm's Deep, what if I was Frodo and you can be Gandalf and I'll be Gimli? That's kind of probably where it came about.
That still only counts as one. But yeah, absolutely. It was literally just a bunch of people got together and said, hey, what if we took the rules and did this with it?
Yeah,
and
Go on.
And that's where Blackmore came from. And eventually, it blossomed into a setting. I forget if it was like if Blackmore was a town or if it was a castle.
It was like a fiefdom. It was there was Blackmore Castle, and you were playing in Blackmore lands. I think Lord Blackmore was like in charge of it, which I think is where like some of the Ultima stuff gets it, like Lord British of being like the One Kingdom guy. I love Ultima. Don't talk bad about it, man. We'll do a whole episode.
Don't recite the deep magic to me, man. I was there when it was written, okay? I've got freaking Exodus over there for my freaking 8-bit console. I don't want to hear it.
Was Exodus 7?
No, dude. Exodus was like 4.
Oh, Exodus was like 4. Yeah. No, I was thinking of 7's Blackgate.
Yeah.
And 8 was bad, and then 9 was worse.
Oh my God, Lord British. That's a guy. That guy's a whole topic for a whole other episode.
It super is, and we don't have time to talk about him right now. But Blackmore as a whole wasn't necessarily just fantasy setting. It was also like a sci-fi setting. Like there was like ray guns and like giant robots and stuff like that. I believe what's the famous D&D AD&D module where you get like ray guns and like giant robots? It's a famous one, and you like invade an alien spaceship, and you have like rocket launchers that are like beam lasers.
Oh God, I don't even remember. I know it's not Tomb of Terror.
No, I'll come to me like halfway through the episode, and I'm not gonna remember it now.
Yeah, that's always what happens.
But after Blackmore, you mentioned Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. That's what it was.
Okay.
And you could get like ray guns and stuff. But after Blackmore was released, David Arneson and Gary Gygax go into business together to form TSR.
Mm-hmm.
And
they said, what if we took Blackmore and made it better?
Well, yeah. Well, and they made Greyhawk, which was Gary Gygax's baby.
Mm-hmm.
He took Greyhawk from a very, very Western. It's very Western Europe kind of setting. There's high medieval ages, which is going to come to a big issue when the monk's going to come out, because it's going to change a lot of things around. And Arneson and Gygax would start fighting over that class, literally in particular.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a terrible class. It doesn't belong in the game.
Monks suck.
Yeah.
Let's just get that out of the way. Monks are terrible, and we hate them.
We don't hate the people that play them. We understand.
No, I hate the people who play them.
Okay. No, I hate the people that play psionicists.
I also hate the people who play Psionicis, but we'll talk about why. But going back just a little bit, I want to talk about the combat rules for just a second of how you actually did damage in this game.
Yeah, because you went through all the work of finding it.
I did. I went through a lot of research to find this, and it has to do with how you would do damage in Dungeons and Dragons or Chainmail fantasy setting at the time. When you had a level, I would have an armor class, and my armor class was given a number. The lower my armor class, the more armor I had. So, for example, plate armor and a shield was armor class 2, and I'll share this graphic. I hope it will show up online. But I'll share this graphic, and you would see what level someone was, and you would go by it, and this is what they had to roll to hit you if you were that level. So I would be like level 4, and I was hitting a guy with armor class 5. I need to roll a 12. And the only reason I would really know this is I just had to go to this chart. All attacks do 1d6 damage unless otherwise noted. Fighting men and magic users have steps that give them little benefits. So like the fighting man at higher levels could always augment it by like lowering it by 1 or 2 if they hit higher levels. So like 1 through 5, they would lower the number by 1. 6 through 10, they would lower it by 2, etc., etc. So even if me and you were going after each other, the fighting man was always hitting you a little bit harder. Clerics played by the straight rules. And if you were just a random schmucko soldier walking around, you were considered a fighting man level 1. So like your average soldier was that. Now this is going to be important when we talk about THAC0 later, because we're not there yet. We're by no means there. We're still talking about AD&D. We're talking not even talking about AD&D. We're talking about this edition of D&D.
We just scratched the surface on Greyhawk.
Just scratched the surface. Now, what also we get added in the initial setting is we have our other three classes we add, and these are classes, not races. You add the elf, the dwarf, and the hobbit.
The halfling. Oh, yeah, right. It was the hobbit. Yep.
It was very clearly the hobbit, because this is going to be a lawsuit in just a little while. Now, the only difference was the elf was better than every other class in literally every other way. That was the benefit of being an elf. You were just superior, literally in every sense of the word. You had powers where you could, dual class. That sounds good. That's not why they're good. Dual class was actually pretty bad. The way you would do dual classing is you would put levels into fighting man and magic user, right? That does not mean I can be a fighting man and a magic user at the same time. No, I go to bed and I wake up the next day as a magic user. Then I go to bed and I wake up the next day as a fighting man.
So you didn't have multiple classes, you had multiple personalities.
Correct. The difference being is an elf could always wear armor and cast spells. So no one ran an elf fighting man. You always ran an elf magic user, because when you put on armor, you could wear the full plate mail and your spell casting was not inhibited. If you were a spellcaster, couldn't wear armor at all. You were like immune to paralysis. You could like see things that had special secrets in them, and that was your kind of that was your old school elf. Now dwarfs could add a high magic resist. They could only level up to level 6. That was their downside, and they could only be a fighting man. The kind of concept is humans are better than these fantasy races if you give them enough time. That's the ideology. You would level up, and if I was a human and you were a dwarf and we were eventually the same amount of time, I'm going to be better than you at some point. So dwarf,
I was going to say no. The short version is just all of the fantasy races had level caps. Like yes. I think like elf. You were capped. Oh, I thought elf was capped at like 7
elf was
like
capped
that.
at 4th level for magic, for fighting man. It was not capped for magic user.
Gotcha.
And that's the big difference. Dwarfs could detect traps and notice what type of architecture something is. Oh
wow, that's so good. Let me tell you how good and amazing that is. That is like so worth it. I am going to base my entire
you know what? I want to play that dwarf character now, whose whole thing is just pointing out. You see, that's a plaster drywall. Oh, that's a stone. And just like completely make shit up half the time. Have the party be like, "What are you talking about?" But we didn't talk about our hobbits, who were like dwarfs, but literally worse in every way. When I say worse every way, they had magic resistance that was not as high as the dwarfs. They were capped at level 4, and that's it.
That's it.
That's
it. That's it. I want to be Frodo. No, you don't.
They apparently had a little benefit to like steal things if you were like in a cave specifically. So if you were doing the thing from The Hobbit that Frodo did, you could get a benefit, but it had to be that specific thing where he stole the thing from Smog. If it wasn't that exact thing, you didn't get any benefits. And you also had a lower movement speed. You always went last in combat, and there was no reason to play them. I literally could not tell you why people played a Hobbit.
And just for clarification for some of the folks that are listening right now, with all of us, like, no, you wouldn't want to play this. Like, that's coming from a specifically like points-based tactical standpoint, because role-playing as we know it, for the most part, really still wasn't necessarily a thing. Like, yeah, like you had these weird characters, but like backstories and stuff like that really still wasn't much of a thing at this point. So the characters that you would be choosing, like if you weren't picking stuff that reflected what you wanted to do, you really weren't going to be able to do a lot, and therefore wouldn't be interacting with the game much or having much fun.
Yeah, because well, it wasn't about like you hit the nail on the head. It wasn't about like I submitted my character backstory like I would do today in D&D. It was more, I'm here, and I hit things real good, and my wizard friend throws fireballs real good, and let's go after him. That's it. Although you'd be fighting like dragons and stuff. Now, they streamlined combat to make it easier in the Chainmail Fantasy Supplement and the initial Greyhawk, but everything was based on this random encounter table with the GM. So I would be playing the game, and hello, I'd roll on the table. Oh, guess what? It's a dragon. That's it. There was no reason for it. They didn't even give you like a story reason why it was there. You'd see the referee roll the dice and go, "There's a dragon." The players would go, "Well, we're fucked. Let's roll up new characters.
We're all 3rd level. We're all gonna die." But yeah, that was tailored encounters or scaled encounters were definitely not a thing. They had basically what was just referred to as status quo encounters. These are things that exist in this world. You have a chance of running into them. And if you get a dragon, if you get like 12 stone golems, guess what? You're done for. Thanks for coming out. This has been Gen Con 3. Tip your waitresses.
Well, and so the whole Gen Con thing. You also hit the nail on the head there. I would take my character and play consistent. If I was in like a big gaming group, we would all have our characters be leveled up as we go on, right? And I would level up my guy. And when I became like an actual superhero, I'd show the table and people would go, "Yo, that dude's a superhero." Awesome. Like, there wasn't like scaled encounters or like this party needs to be balanced. You showed up to a new group, man, you were just there, man. OG Chainmail, you showed up. I popped down my level 18 fighter, you popped down your level 1 Hobbit for some reason, and man, stuff just happened. But in Greyhawk, we start seeing new classes.
Mm-hmm.
And we see 2 of the staples who've emerged in D&D ever since the start of all of this. We see our thief for the first time, whose benefit was they could wear leather armor, and they had the power to sneak attack people. They could come behind somebody, and they could stab them in the back and do additional damage. The stuff that we know thieves for, like I want to actually rob from somebody, you didn't get like pickpocket until like 6th level. You didn't get picklock until like 5th level. And everything was percent based. You would roll a D100.
Terrible back then.
Oh yeah, if you were a level 6 thief who just learned pickpocket, you had a 30% chance to succeed. That means 70% of the time, that guy was turning around and hitting you.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to think about from the tactical game perspective. What was I stealing from them? I was stealing their weapon, so they couldn't fight me. And that was the balance in the head back then. If I had a 70% chance to just take the weapon out of your hand, that would be really busted. So they were like, well, this will happen only occasionally. And that's really what I went. I didn't go after like I picked the guy's pocket for the hidden plans to the castle water team. No, I want his sword so he doesn't stab me with the sword. And I'm going to stab him with his sword.
Because it's better than my sword.
Well, you could use daggers as a thief. You could use short swords if you were high enough level, though.
Mhm.
But then we get our class. That's my favorite class in D&D, the Paladin.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
I love Paladins. They were a big deal, man. Because when you rolled for today, when you roll for stats in D&D, for those of you who don't know, everyone I think house rules it just a little bit. Because the way I used when I first started playing Pathfinder, the way the GM told me to roll stats was you roll 4d6, re-roll ones, and drop the lowest. That was the way I was taught to roll. Was that your experience initially?
That's generally that. The only flip flop is kinder GMs let you reroll ones, or they let you occasionally reroll ones, and then there's the ones that don't let you reroll ones.
Well, usually it's 4d6, drop the lowest.
Correct.
And you put it into the stat you want. So let's say I want to play a fighter and I roll a 12 on my first roll. That might be my charisma stat. Okay. I rolled a 15. Cool, that might be my strength. You would look at all your numbers afterwards. You'd have to like assign then and there. That's kind of how it works now, and I don't think that's ever going away.
No.
Today there's also point buy, which is you have this amount of points, put them into your sheet so one has a truly balanced character.
Mhm.
I'm personally a fan of rolling. I think rolls add an element of fun to the character creation.
Absolutely. There's just enough fun, just enough randomness to like keep it spicy. Like point buys, I think are really good if you're doing like Adventurers League stuff and you're doing stuff for conventions.
Yeah,
if you want to make sure everybody's balanced and you can't be standing to make sure every single person is fair with their dice rolls. Look, I got 5 18s.
Oh my
What
goodness!
are the chances of that?
Yeah, I got 3 18s in my character. Hey, can I see those dice? Why do you want to see my dice? You know what? Once we finish this little soiree into the history of D&D, I guess we'll talk about DMing Horror Story, because I was a GM for Adventurers League for a little while, and oh man, I had people bring like clear dice. You know those dice that are like white on white, and they would roll them, and I always see the roll like this, and I'm just like, we all know you're cheating. It's a crit. Is it a crit? Really? But the point why I brought up rolling, back in the day, you decided your class after you rolled your stats because you rolled 3d6
right down the line
in order. You don't re-roll once. You want to play a fighter and you rolled a 3 for your first stat. That's possible. You're not re-rolling those ones. You got a 3 in strength. You better be playing a magic user. It still ran off the same stats, you know, but rogues tend to use dexterity, fighters tend to use strength, magic users tend to use intelligence, the cleric tended to use wisdom, and you would roll, and there was always this one dumb stat that no one used, because it wasn't a role-playing game, really. It's charisma.
Charisma, yep.
And that's your force of, I am so awesome that people like me. I swear to God, the reason why a sorcerer was included in the later sessions is people kept bragging on charisma enough. There's like, no, charisma's good. There's this guy and he's pretty, so he casts spells.
What do you mean? What about bards? What about bards, Michael?
No, I forgot about bards.
The true best class.
I forgot about bards.
The true best class.
But a paladin, in order to be a paladin, you needed these stat requirements. You need at least a 14 in strength and a 17 in charisma. That means for the last roll you do, because charisma is the bottom stat, you have to roll a 17 or an 18.
Or an 18. That's it.
Now, on the odds of the chart, there, I believe in like a 2d6 in like the bell curve, there's like 36 different outcomes you can get into the dice roll. 3 of them are 17 and 18. The odds of it happening are so low, and it was rigidly enforced. Like, the GM was watching you roll. Sorry, referee. The referee was watching you roll those dice. And if you got a 17, my God, you said, I'm the paladin. Oh, it's me. I want to be the paladin. Because you were just better in every way. You could heal people. You start off with a power called Detect Evil and Smite Evil. You got a warhorse. Like, you just started with a horse. Your to-hit benefits were better than the fighting man. You could use all the weapons the fighting man could use. In addition to clerical spellcasting abilities, you could cast spells but not rely on memorization. You were still restricted by spell slots, but you could just do everything, and you were the paladin.
Yep, and I believe, I could be wrong, were holy swords a thing yet, or was that later? Because I believe paladins were the only ones that could wield a holy sword.
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. A holy sword comes in later in AD&D. That was a cleric and paladin a paladin ability. Initially, there was just magic items and non-magic items. If you were a fighting man, no matter what the item was, you could pick it up. I don't think paladins. I think the one restriction is they couldn't use like. I think it was like great axes or great swords. You just weren't allowed to use them because like you had your shield and your shield was a big part of you. So like, the only magic weapons that could hold were one-handed, but like no one was complaining. So who cares?
Everyone was complaining because it was terrible.
And then later we get the official. This is what now we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, actually by name Dungeons and Dragons. And then we get our Blackmore supplement to Dungeons and Dragons. This is all original Dungeons and Dragons was just Greyhawk. And we add Blackmore, which added two classes. We have the Assassin, who was just like the Rogue, the Thief, but literally better in every way. You had a power where you could have instant death poison. And what it did is I stab you with it, okay? And if I'm the same level as you, I roll a D100. Was it above a 25%? Cool, you die. That's it. And it goes, I think you drop like 2 to 3% every level higher you are than me. So the assassin just walk out. There'd be this level 1 assassin, this level 18 paladin. You go, I got him. And you'd walk away. And you could disguise yourself as anything you wanted to. And then we get our class that we mentioned already. The stupid monk.
Stupid monk.
Now,
nobody likes monks.
Initially, D&D was drawn by literally Gygax and his friends, so there's no pictures in Blackmore besides like the cover. So when people heard monk, they weren't picturing like the Asian kung fu master. They were picking like a Franciscan dude like punching people in the face.
Now, not all of it was Gygax. A lot of it was traced from like Marvel comics.
It was blatantly traced from Marvel comics. Like it literally side by side comparison. This Fantastic Four comics where it's Nick Fury running towards the camera, and it's just that, but he's a fighter. There's also a lot of nudity because he really liked Conan the Barbarian.
That Frank Franzetta art. Actually, wait, no, I don't think Frank Franzetta was that much of a thing just yet. He was later.
No,
exactly. Don't worry about it. That's fantasy
Maybe.
artwork.
We'll talk about that when we get to our Lovecraft and Conan episode, which will probably be an episode. But the monks were really overtly complicated because they were built off not the fighting man, not the paladin, not the cleric, the thief.
Rogue.
Yeah.
Why?
They could like pickpocket people, but they had a code of honor, just like by the way, the paladin detriment. If you broke your code of honor, you just lost your paladin character. You could not be a paladin anymore. You lost every level you put in paladin, you were done. You were stuck to a rigid code of honor. You had to be the most lawful good of lawful good, questing Grail Knight. And that's it. Once you weren't a questing Grail Knight anymore, you were no longer a paladin. The monk also had that. So a paladin, if you took treasure from somebody, you couldn't keep it if it was coins. Now, if you killed them and took their sword, it's okay. But the monk had the same vow of poverty, but they had pickpocket as their class skill. They were also even more rigid than the paladin. You need 15 wisdom, 15 dexterity, and 12 strength to play a monk. You had D4 hit dice opposed to paladin's D8 and fighting man's D8. You had the wizard's hit dice, not even the thief's hit dice. The thief had D6. You could do sample level of martial arts. The only way you could level up is you had to challenge a monk of higher level than you, because according to the world of D&D, there can only be like 15 dudes who are skilled in martial arts. And once somebody wants to hit level 15, I have to find one of those dudes, beat him up, and then take his position. If I lose, I automatically lose a level, or just die. I might just die.
And that was a thing for a while. Like, yeah, it was a thing with monks. They eventually did it with druids too.
Druids, yeah.
Yep. But I think what was I going to say? And back to one of the previous points is this was another one of those classes where they attached these ridiculous superfluous titles to the upper levels. It's like at 15th level you were like the master of the moon, and then at 16th level you were the master of the sun. All I remember is I know the 20th level one is you became the master of flowers. Yeah. I forget what all the other ones leading up to it were, but yes, again with the weird titles, man.
Iron is 19. I remember Master of Iron being the 19th level, and the reason for that, and they explain it in AD&D, and I kind of like it, is at 20th level, you've already done all the fighting stuff, so you've stopped to smell the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still dumb. They even gave them spell casting, but forgot to make it good. I forgot to make it useful.
Forgot to make it good.
So they gave them like these really shitty spells, and no one knew what the hell they were talking. They were like, "Yeah, the monk can do a lot of things, like punch people." Oh, cool! Does his fist do more damage than a sword? No.
No. Why would it do more damage than a sword? That's stupid.
No, that's dumb. Wait, what if we gave him like chi powers and let him have this grappling rules? The grappling supplement for the monk in Blackmore was 6 pages.
6 pages. This is where I'd like to just take a moment and I want everyone, you can all agree with me because you know I'm right. Grappling has never worked in the history of Dungeons and Dragons. In the 50 years they have yet to come out with a single grappling supplement that makes any sort of sense. It's freaking broken and it's stupid, and thank you, you're welcome. Now it's out there, everyone can agree with me. Never grapple again.
Well, I feel like every time I remember when I was running my first game when I was in high school, and somebody was playing a dwarf, and he was a dwarf barbarian. He's like, I want to hold him and grapple him. And we were like, awesome. I was like, yeah, I don't know how to do that. And I remember we opened up the player's handbook, and we're all sitting around the table. We're all moderately intelligent high schoolers reading the grapple rules, and we're like, and then you have to make, you know what? Roll strength. 16, cool, he's grappled. Shut the book, and we never looked at it again. If you just want to hit the guy and just hold him down, just beat him down to 0 hit points, I'll say he doesn't die, and you'll do it like a video game when you have the choice to spare the guy's life. And they're like, oh, that sounds good, let's do that. But it was bad. Like, this whole grappling mechanic was just dumb. Well, it's not as dumb as the next thing we're going to talk about, which is the thing I literally hate more than anything else in D&D.
We love role-playing. We're going to talk about role-playing. We hate all of this.
And this thing is like, this was bad, and that sucked, and if you played a Hobbit, you were bad. Oh, Hobbit, by the way, this is about the time period where Tolkien found out they were using the word Hobbit, and they sent a cease and desist to Gary Gygax. And Gary Gygax fought it in court and just lost. So they changed Hobbit to Halfling. Because of course that happened. But the thing that we hate, there was a supplement called Eldritch Wizardry that came out and added 2 things. One of them was well loved and well praised and still in the game today. It was called Druids. They were essentially like nature wizards who could turn into animals and stuff. Although combat forms weren't really a big thing back then. You could
you turned into little things. You could turn into a snake. You could turn into a badger. You could maybe turn into like a black bear or something that's kind of threatening.
The word used is small bear. Whatever that means. I want to be a small midget bear with big teeth that does D100 damage. Fear me. And they level up the same way as monks. They had to go find the archdruid and go like fight him in like death combat. Because of course. And they added a thing called psionics. Show the stupid handbook.
The stupid handbook of stupidness. The stupidest handbook ever. Well, this is 2nd edition advanced Stupids and Dragons with the stupidest of psionics. Oh my god. Like, I can appreciate what they were attempting to do with psionics. They want to have something that's like a different form of magic. That's rad. I can support that. But much like grappling, every time they've tried to do it since the beginning, it just gets worse.
Well, I guess let's talk about what psionics is first. Psionics is like, I'm a wizard, but I'm not. I have mental powers and they shoot out.
You're to just use the pop culture reference. You're Professor X. You're Jean Grey. You have mental powers of telepathy and telekinesis and telekawatsis and telekinephews, and you
have a telekinephew.
Everybody whose sibling has a child right now has telekinesis and telekinephews because COVID. Moving along. God, that was the worst joke ever. We'll have to edit it
I'm
out in
so
post.
funny. I want the people to know how funny I am.
I'm so
because
funny.
we're a comedy informational podcast. I'm very funny, and I need people to know my brand. Also, my brand.
Freaking magicians.
So what happened probably is they read an X-Men comic, and Gygax was like, I want to play Xavier. Like, guys, let's write rules for Charles Xavier. What can he do? And they open up the X-Men, like, they had their one friend who came over to their apartment who was like, all right, so he does a lot of stuff. He can do all this stuff. And they go, okay, do we condense it down? No, let's find ways to put literally all of it in a supplement and give it all rules, despite the fact they don't play the same rules. So you would roll things like, you would roll like a hypercharge, and you would roll a D100 at the start of your turn. This then gave you the amount of charges you could use per battle. Then you would roll an individual D10 and tells you what psychic power you had primed. You could re-roll it by spending one of your charge points you got previously. Then you made an attack against the individual, who you would roll your psychic modifier compared to their armor class, which was given its own level. Because remember how everything has a level? So my psychic powers might be a level like 10. I might be a level 4 character. I feel like a level 10 psychic power because I'm really smart. And I would cast it at the person. And then if it worked, it would take effect. And then we roll a percentile dice to see if they resist it or not, depending on what class they were and what level they were. And if they were elves, they got like a benefit somehow. And then they took off their pants and ran around with knives.
That was just a test to see if people were still listening. I had stopped.
Well, it's just dumb. It's confusing.
It is.
It was broken. There was like psionics they were there and they increased different things, and everyone's like, let's forget this ever happened. But then let's not and put it back in every edition ever.
Forever. Dude, I would literally pay to find out from like somebody that lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, with like in the neighborhood of Gygax, how many people sent back their freaking the freaking pamphlet like Eldritch Wizardry. I want my $5 back, Gygax.
Well,
this was bunk.
Well, it also gave you druids, and it also included the first evidence of demons in D&D. And this is the first time we get oh god, what's his name?
Cthulhu?
No, the big demon guy in D&D who I can't remember the name.
Asmodeus?
Asmodeus. This is the first time we get Asmodeus mentioned.
Okay.
As the king of demons. And this is the Eldritch Wizardry handbook. The Dungeons & Dragons would go on when the official release comes around in 74, and we get the white box, because it was in a white box. Most of the boxes were tan. We add the final 3 classes, thank God. We add the Ranger, who was a paladin change, not really the nature guy that we think of. They wanted to make Aragorn, so they just made Aragorn. He had a code of honor, and you could be a paladin without having a dumb stat requirement. If you want to be a paladin, you still have the dumb stat requirement.
So real quick, Michael, I've been checking in with the chat now, and apparently they want us to rewind a bit and go on a little bit more about the pantsless elves.
The pantsless elves? Well, that was something I was saying. I was making sure people were paying attention.
Oh, they were paying attention. They were paying attention to the pantsless elves.
Okay, well, that was a thing. Moving right along. Contact Gary Gygax through a seance and see what happens. Rest in peace. Guy was a hero. We add our final three classes. We had the Ranger. We add the Illusionist, who was the first specialization in magic. He uses all these spoons of the powers of magic, and oh, what can they do? There's schools of magic now, and the only one you can be is Illusionist, which was really, really good if it wasn't terrible. The way illusionism, and that wasn't even being hyperbole, illusion worked like this. I would cast an illusion spell at you. You would then roll to see if the spell was real or not. If you believed it was real, it happened. And illusionists could cast super high levels above them. So they could prime like power word kill and be like, you better roll high enough your percentile dice, or this is going to insta-kill you. And finally, you had the Bard, who had thief skills, magic skills, bardic lore that let them know things, and they were like a jack of all trades of everything. And that's the white box of D&D. Shortly after this, there was a magazine that comes out called Dragon Magazine, where a bunch of errata is going to show up in. It's also where we're going to get our first real drama part of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Gygax and Arneson start having a fallout. If you hear Gygax's side, David Arneson was a better coming up with concepts guy than a writer. So Gygax apparently gave him a whole bunch of work, and he just never did it. And they started fighting over who should own the company, and Gygax fired him. In 1977, a guy named John Eric Holmes released the first mass-marketed D&D game called Dungeons & Dragons, marketing it to college kids, which is why we get the D&D, hey, all the kids are playing D&D in college. And that's where that comes from. It kind of is replacing war games now. While this is all going on, Gygax is going to go on to create Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And it's going to be his big magnum opus. We'll start off, I think, next week's episode, because I think we're at time.
Yeah, we are. It is 7:56. I was just about to say that.
Yeah, so next week we'll talk about Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the fallout, the lawsuit that happened because of AD&D, the settlements, the thousands upon thousands of tables they have in that book. You know, if you want to contract a dietary disease, there's a table for it. And that's kind of been, I thought we were going to get through AD&D, but apparently the intro stuff is just too much.
There's just so much. There's so much, and there's so much to hate. Which I hope it really gives people an appreciation for, like, how far things have come and how fun and how awesome of a hobby it has grown into, you know, today. But I mean, I think next week is going to be where, like, a lot of the really fun stuff that people can really sink their teeth into is going to come up. Aside from the lawsuit and everything, this is where we can bring up all of the fun campaign settings. This is where, like, D&D really started to get its flavor and really started to come into its own as a role-playing game, and not just like a bunch of combat mechanics that a bunch of people decided they wanted to play Lord of the Rings with.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the campaign settings. We'll talk about how the game changed. We'll talk about the schools of magic and why you apparently hate, like, what's the one that you think healing should be, and you're wrong for it?
Well, honestly, I feel like healing mostly should fall under transmutation,
You're
and
dumb.
I'm not wrong.
I
am not wrong.
That's
it's
dumb.
a brilliant.
That's dumb.
It's perfect.
Nope.
It makes sense.
No, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about it next week, and we'll talk about why you're terribly wrong.
Whatever. It should just be necromancy again and call it.
It is necromancy now.
Sometimes.
No, it's always necromancy now. 5th edition is always necromancy.
Whatever with your space wizardry. 5th edition.
Speaking of space wizardry, Spelljammer was really good.
Hell yeah, Spelljammer was good. But again, we'll be talking about that next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Tune in 7 o'clock. But as always, I think that's, as I was saying before, I think that's time for us. So if you have enjoyed your time with us this evening, as always, I am Dr. J.R. Whitcomb.
I'm Michael O.J.
And if you didn't like us, then this has been a totally different podcast. We did it. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you all real soon.
Good night, everybody.